Hello again, everybody. So we want to cover in this, I guess you could call it an episode at this point, the basically the absorption and the nutritional requirements and values of fresh foods versus processed foods. What does regulation say? What do we know about nature? What are some important things to consider that don't really get brought up all that often in conversation? Because for the most part in regulation, we're trying to fit this like square peg into a round hole, where regulation was developed for processed foods that were available to the masses. And as fresh foods have come along, gotten onto the market and really become available, the regulators were like, well, we already have regulations, so just adhere to that, as opposed to doing what they should be doing and writing additional new regulation for fresh foods. So we're going to start off with an AAFCO book. This one happens to be the 2018 official publication. They're all very similar. There's just some minor modifications with additional ingredients that get entered in here and there. It might push things around a page, but this particular thing that I'm going to read is consistent in all of them that I've ever seen, and I have these laying everywhere. So starting at, for adult dogs, there is no established minimum requirement for iron, although iron is considered essential for adult dogs. In setting the RA recommended an allowance of 30 mg per kg in dietary dry matter for adult maintenance, the NRC subcommittee considered the apparent digestibility of iron to be 20%. However, the explanatory text in the publication notes that measured apparent digestibility of iron in the scientific literature has ranged from close to 100% to less than 10%, and is affected by numerous factors, such as the specific source of iron, the concentration of other specific minerals or other ingredients in the diet, as well as the iron status of the animal. So I think that that's a good kickoff point for us in having the discussion about what do all these variables mean? So off to the food scientist. Tell us, Roxanne.
Yeah. Well, that's a good segue, Chelsea, into the NRC is your sort of your desk reference that many of us use. This last one was published in 2006, which is the most recent we have. They've been publishing them since 1979. And this is where AAFCO does pull a lot of their nutrient profiles are start with this, and then some have been modified since then. But this is the basic Bible for the I guess the conglomerate of the literature and the research studies since really the early 1900s. And just to add to what Chelsea said about iron and the degree of variability, you can see there's so many things to consider when you're considering the bioavailability or digestibility or absorbability, however you want to look at it, of nutrients for our pets. And one of the things that is I guess at debate in the industry is fresh food versus heavily processed dry foods like kibble, which you see mostly on the commercial market. And as a food scientist, obviously, I have had my fair share of the study of manufacturing and processing on food and what that does to food, what that does to the nutrients in food, and so forth. So you have all of that at play. And then, as Chelsea mentioned in what she read about iron, the state of health of the animal. So not only do you have the food and all those variables that can affect what that food has to offer as far as nutrients, then you have the current health state of the animal itself and how that affects digestibility as well. So just a little bit more kind of reading out of the NRC, I do want to add, based on just the one nutrient we know, iron, that Chelsea just talked about. This is just this is a basic summary from the NRC on metabolizable energy. Okay, so this is just the energy that your pet could pull out of food overall. So of course, here at 2006, when they wrote the book, at present, the enormous variability of prepared pet foods on the market with digestibilities of energy, meaning their kilocalories or what they're going to get as actual energy out of it, ranging from less than 70% to more than 90%, does not allow the use of just one equation with factors for macronutrients. So what that means is when you're calculating metabolizable energy for a food, you use the macronutrients in the food that can provide the energy. And the three macronutrients that are going to provide your energy are fat, of course, carbohydrate, and protein. And so they're all given a weighted factor of what energy they can provide. So many of us all know that fat provides the most energy, with carbohydrates and protein coming in second. So for your formula mathematical lesson today, in a fresh food diet, that meaning something that's highly digestible, and again, in the NRC, they talk about it in here, and they're specifically say that if you are going to use these equations to figure out the metabolizable energy in a food, you have to know how digestible your food is. And so they specifically say in the predictive equations for metabolizable energy that unprocessed food, this is how they describe it, unprocessed food or human food, such as meat, offal, which is organs, milk, milk products, cooked starch sources, highly digestible products such as milk or milk substitutes, or diets for internal nutrition. Basically, they're saying that if you're going to use these types of food, then your equation would be that you would give for your macronutrients would be 4 calories per gram for protein, 4 calories per gram for carbohydrates, and 9 calories per gram for your fat. Now, the caveat to that is what they say in here: if you're not using unprocessed foods and you're using foods that are highly processed and maybe don't have a digestibility of greater than 90%, they tell you to use a modified version of the Atwater factors, which takes it down 0.5 point for each macronutrient. So now your protein gets a factor of 3.5, your carbohydrate gets a factor of 3.5, and your fat gets a factor of 8.5. So why is this important? Why are we going over this? Because when you're looking at the AAFCO nutrient profiles and they're determining metabolizable energy, they're assuming that your food is processed and it's kibble. And so that's the type of nutrient profiles that when they break it down, that they're going after. So they're looking at the food as if it is the least digestible, and the minerals itself too will be, I guess, antagonistic with other nutrients, meaning some things will get chelated or bound, and that makes it less digestible. So I just want to make that distinction that not all foods are the same. We know that processed foods and fresh foods are going to have very distinct and different capabilities in our animals' diets. So we can't all fit under this umbrella of one size fits all. And that's what AAFCO basically puts us in, like Chelsea said, a square peg in a round hole. It doesn't work. So here we are.
Yes, here we are. So looking below the actual nutrient profiles in the AAFCO book on F as a little note, it says, because of very poor apparent digestibility, iron from carbonate or oxide sources that are added to the diet should not be considered in determining minimum nutrient concentration for iron. Now, that's not the only one where they have some kind of mention like that. So that goes back to saying you know, they, in some cases, they know that they can account for these variabilities that you get in what your pet is even going to be able to access. And they're like, well, we know that these particular synthetic or isolate or heat processed ingredients are going to be a really serious problem. So you need to take these into account. But there's a lot of things that they don't know or they don't mention. Or as we alluded to in our copper talk, there are some things where they're like, we just don't know enough. They just kind of like, let's just throw that one out for right now and not talk about it until it comes back again. So, you know, the way that I kind of visualize what it's like in them developing these requirements, you know, they mostly don't have minimums there, or I mean maximums. There's a few maximums, but it's mostly just minimums. And even then, having sat through all these different AAFCO meetings and all the laboratory meetings and seeing the way that this is done, in my head, it's kind of like, you know, you're an archer and you're looking at a big wall, a big one, and it's got a target in the middle, and that would be accurate. And we know that there is a general accurate, it's probably still fairly big because it's not the same for everybody, but we still know kind of what that range is. And we know that Mother Nature is going to get the closest to that range, particularly if there's a lot of rotation going on in the diet. And then we're like, not we, because we use Mother Nature, but humans and scientists and regulators, they come along and they're like, well, you know, how can we have all of these isolates and these things that are more profitable and these things that are more controllable? I think that's one of the biggest things about regulation is it's not necessarily what's right or what's best, it's what we can control. And
Agreed.
yeah, I think that that's where we end up losing a lot of the value of food, and they might disagree. I actually have heard them disagree before where they're like, yeah, but you can't control it, so that's just not even safe. And we disagree with that. So agree to disagree, I guess. But, you know, the further that you get out, the more people that are more purists and we're like, nature will always know better than us. We got to go with nature. And then you've got the people that are like, you know, reductionist nutrient people, and they're like, just get it on the target somewhere on the wall, just don't hit the floor, don't hit the walls, don't hit the ceiling. But if it's on the bottom right hand corner of a target that's 80 feet wide, like, we're doing a good job because this is information we have, these are the limitations that we have. So by extension, can you describe kind of some of the differences between the way that a whole food would function when it comes down to reducing it to individual micronutrients versus using a synthetic isolate?
Yeah, well, and that's where, you know, it's still a very theoretical science. I wish I could break down the full biochemistry for you of exactly what was happening, and that's where we do have to default to nature and its infinite wisdom that it has it right. We do know through laboratory analysis, I think, and just through clinical trials, throughout history, that even though the advent of synthetic vitamins helped a lot of people and took care of some of the most dramatic diseases that were a result of deficiencies, like absorbic acid can take care of vitamin C deficiency, even though absorbic acid is only a portion of the full vitamin, it will keep scurvy at bay. Okay. Pellagra for vitamin B deficiency, vitamin D deficiency, all of these things. There are synthetic vitamins that are good enough, I guess, to keep people or pets out of the serious diseases that could result. Okay, so they did get that far, and I guess you know, that's a I guess that's kudos to modern science to be able to mimic those molecules enough for the body to recognize them enough to utilize them. However, on the other side of that, there's limitations, okay, in what the body can do when you have an isolated and fractionated portion of a nutrient. And I think that's where we may have patted ourselves on the back a little bit too much in the industry as a whole, saying we've got this covered. You know, we figured out all the necessary vitamins and their cofactors and even some of the enzymes, and we've got this covered. And we're far from that. We're still very far from that on many levels. And I think that's part of where you know, I think that's where the debate happens in the regulators versus the purists versus the prey model diet people. And Chelsea's right. It you know, it's a large you know, board that we know of that we can function in. You know, the other thing that Chelsea mentioned was rotation and variability. And so when you are dependent on using whole foods and expecting to get your complete nutrients from whole foods, that's where rotation and variation is important. And that is sort of the way we were designed to eat, as well as our pets were designed to eat. So there is a school of thought where eating seasonally and the seasonality of food serves a purpose and serves a function. And we've kind of glossed over that now in the world of our modern world of an infinite food supply. And there's some thoughts and theories on that. So, you know, the bottom line is, again, as far as complete nutrition and everything that you could possibly need to get out of food is always going to be better as the whole food, as it was meant to be consumed, minimally processed, if not processed at all, and in its whole form. So, you know, kind of unless there's again, historically, we've learned from our ancestors how to consume certain vegetables, for instance, where we might not eat the stalks, or we might not eat parts of the leaves that have oxalates, or other parts that have anti-nutrients. So we've learned, that's a learned sort of behavior that has been passed down from centuries on eating foods. And then, of course, we know the science behind a little bit more behind that and why our ancestors prepared foods the way that they did. But ultimately, when it comes down to it, we still have a lot to learn on vitamins. From what I understand, even though there's products that say they're digestive enzymes and they've been able to kind of mimic enzymes. Again, I'm not an expert in the lab on this, but from what I understand, there's a lot of scientists that consider enzymes as well. Enzymes are proteins. They're amino acids put together just like proteins, and that they're sort of the driver of life. So we know proteins are the building blocks of life, but enzymes are actually kind of the drivers behind it, and that they're the life force. And we really haven't been able to successfully, from what I understand, mimic those or synthetically produce those. And enzymes are very delicate and can be easily destroyed. So the best way to get them is in truly fresh foods. And you just can't match them. Although I guess people would debate that when you see supplemental enzymes, digestive enzymes on the market. Again, I guess you would have to look at the clinical trials to see how successful they are. But like I said, some of them can help, just like some vitamins and synthetic vitamins do help in situations. I don't think they're ever going to match what nature can do. And that's, that's where we're still at that point.
Yeah, definitely. So when I'm like analyzing where I stand on a topic, first I ask myself, like, why is there such a broad spectrum of belief that allows for so much debate? And I think that that's important to address here because, if you think back through history, like, why did people develop scurvy in the first place? My understanding is that it started out with when people started going overseas and they were spending months and months, sometimes years at sea. You don't have access to fresh fruits and fresh vegetables for more than a very short period of time once you embark. And you have some access to proteins, but even that is going to be a little bit limited. And so what they primarily did was they made these like wheat blocks, just these really hard things that just had to be soaked in something for them to even get a bite out of it. But it was something that could be stored for a very long time. It was very low moisture, so that it wasn't molding or anything like that. You could get a lot of them on a ship and feed a lot of people for a long time. But of course, they didn't have the nutrients that they needed. So taking that and saying, okay, in history, we had this experience where people were eating this processed block of things that didn't have enough nutrition. And as a result, we started seeing pretty significant diseases from deficiencies. How does that relate to pets? Well, if you're feeding a cereal that doesn't really have nutritional requirements as a base, like, you can choose if you want to add a lot of nutrients, but we've all heard the story about a pet food company that made a kibble product out of leather shoes, sawdust, and motor oil. And because they threw a vitamin mineral premix in, it passed all the AAFCO requirements for it to be a complete and balanced food. So, like, if what you're feeding is the equivalent to a pirate's block of wheat, then you would be correct in saying that synthetic supplementation is one of the best things that you can do. That is absolutely accurate, and that's not even for debate. But where there starts to come in debate is, in what environment would that occur these days, where your pet and you would have no access to any additional variety, where they wouldn't have access to any kind of fresh foods, they wouldn't have access to all of these other sources of nutrients, even down to dirt. Like, and that brings me all the way over to the other side, where people are doing like whole prey model raw. And this is a consideration that I bring up a lot with people. If you feel like doing muscle meat, organ meat, and bone is whole prey model raw, you're not entirely accurate about that if you're not also feeding skin and hair and dirt, because skin is high enough in fat that it significantly alters the macronutrient ratio to be what it's supposed to be. And hair and dirt have really high mineral contents. And we learned recently, actually in the, I didn't put it next to me this time, but the mineral, I forget what we call it, but it's this big old fat book. And it's about minerals, and it talks about how there are some minerals that we know are beneficial for the diet, but we don't have enough clarity around them to know what to do with them, so we don't recommend them. Rubidium is one of those that is found almost solely in dirt, and rubidium naturally pushes up potassium levels. Now, potassium in most food products is actually really difficult to get in high enough levels. But if you have some rubidium in there, you don't have to push potassium up. So there's so many other factors about natural feeding and about just the way that Earth functions. So, when it comes down to which side of the coin am I on for the debate, it doesn't necessarily have to be that. It might be down to, what is my environment and lifestyle that I'm putting my pet into, and what's really necessary for me. Like, can I
Right,
give them fresh foods, or
right.
am I giving them wheat blocks and I have to supplement with some
Supplement.
synthetics?
Right, right. And that, yeah, that's a good point. And in our modern world, in our post-industrial revolution world, we can make those choices. We can do the wheat block, synthetic vitamin, and survive. And we do, and people have, and pets have, and um, there's certainly limitations, and then you can choose to do everything in between, or fully fresh diet. And I guess that is the convenience of our modern world and our infinite food supply, if you want to look at it that way, that um, we have the convenience and the capability to do any one of those sort of bookends, and then everything in between. And that's what a lot of people choose to do. And it really does depend on your lifestyle, your budget, and what you have access to. Are you a high rise city person that maybe gets to a farmer's market once a month, or are you currently living on a farm and have the capability to have a couple chickens and go out and get your eggs fresh? So it just really depends. The nice thing is that a lot of city folks do have the opportunity now to get a little bit more farm fresh produce and animals and so forth, that because of the way we're able to get into the cities with farmers markets and so forth. That's a nice opportunity. But in the end, when it comes down to regulation, and what we're saddled with, I guess, is maybe not the best term, but as manufacturers, and a manufacturer of a commercial pet food, that's where it's really unfortunate, where the regulation steps in to kind of squash the manufacturer who is looking to really be transparent with their products and with their ingredients. And actually, believe it or not, I mean, you think that it's funny because it's two-pronged on that approach. So you have regulation over here that is technically or intended to protect the consumer, right? And they're saying, we're gonna be your watchdog, so that those manufacturers don't get away with false advertising for you, right? We're gonna police this for the consumer, so that that manufacturer can't say, there's grilled chicken in here, and have a grilled chicken picture on the bag, and there is no grilled chicken on that, right? So you have that approach, and consumers should be like, yay, that's great. Regulation's going to help me out, and they're going to come down hard on these, false advertising. And then on the flip side, you have the small manufacturer, or the whole food manufacturer, or maybe the one that is, trying to use more herbal remedies and homeopathy and other types of remedies in their diet or in their products, but they don't fall under the drug claim whole propaganda thing that the regulators have put together to help pharmaceuticals. So on that end, for manufacturers who are trying to educate and be transparent with their consumer of what is in their food and why they're choosing that particular ingredient in their food, now they're unfortunately they're arrested at doing that, because or they're limited in what they can do, because they're not a drug. You can only do it if you're a drug. Okay,
And
so
watch
now
our video about that.
yes, exactly. So you've got consumer protection over here, where the regulators are saying, we're trying to help you out by coming down on these manufacturers and not letting them false advertise. But then you have it on the flip side, where people are trying to be transparent and say, okay, for instance, I'm using, I want to use mushrooms in my diet for an anti-carcinogen, or I want to use, clay, earth clay, montmorillonite clay, to get a diversity of trace elements and trace minerals in my food. Well, you can't do that under regulation. So it's really confounding, because they're at odds with each other. So you have the consumer advocates over here that want regulators to have full carte blanche to stymie and regulate the manufacturer's labels, the websites, their social media. And that, I understand that for those who might be false advertising or being manipulative with their marketing. But then on the flip side, you have the folks that want to use the herbal remedies, want to educate about why they're choosing certain ingredients in their food for for disease prevention, and they can't. They're shut down because of the drug thing. If you want to talk more about that, Chelsea.
Yeah, and actually, I really want to clarify that the regulators having the ability to control the one side, it like even that is false advertising in some ways, just in the sense that they don't provide a lot of clarity to the consumers, and in some ways they make it intentionally difficult for them to understand what a product is. So like corn gluten meal is my favorite example out of probably 400 that I can pull out of an AAFCO book. Corn gluten meal, they've managed to convince vets that it's just this high protein source of corn. That's true. It is a high protein source of corn, but the reason for that is because it's a byproduct of the biodiesel industry. So all of the carbohydrate and starch was extracted out of that chemically. It is a chemical industry, not a food industry. Mm-hmm. So they extracted all that out for making ethanol, leaving the high protein trash available for sale into the pet and agricultural industry. Now, at that point, that product has 16 different chemical ingredients, including anhydrous ammonia, liquid urea, sulfur dioxide. It's got 3 different antibiotics. The list goes on and on. It's so toxic. It's registered as a chemical by the EPA, and they can't release the water used to produce it into the environment. So that was something that consumers started to be like, hey, I'm not sure that I want to be using that product. So AAFCO labeled it villain ingredients, and they have now changed it to corn protein meal because it sounds better than corn gluten meal. So it's still really misleading. And then on the other side of that, we've been looking at putting basically a dirt supplement into our products, and we're still working on this, but it's like you can't just take dirt and just give it, because it's likely to be high in heavy metals, pathogens, parasites, protozoa, like all these things can go wrong with dirt. So you have to be meticulous with what you're doing. So we have this source to be able to do this, which we'll get into another time. But going through the AAFCO book, we're like, how can we get this on the ingredient label when we get to that point for solutions products? The only definition that slightly fits is animal waste derivative. It is not an animal waste derivative. It basically would substitute for like a fecal transplant without any of the risk. And it has so many nutrient benefits. Like there's so much amazing quality to this product, and we would have to label it something that consumers would be like, no.
Right.
So, yeah, hands really tied.
Right. So how do you teach to it? How do you when you have an innovative product like that really lends itself to, again, an all natural product? We know that our dogs can benefit from those homeostatic soil microorganisms, but how do we classify them and get them into food where they can have, I mean, it's so ridiculous that, again, something as simple as sea salt doesn't have a definition in AAFCO, so we have to label it salt. And most people think of salt as table salt and iodized table salt processed when we're using high quality natural sea salt, but we can't even talk about that. Kombucha will never have an ingredient definition. I shouldn't say never. I guess it'll be a long time or a long shot to get something like kombucha into an animal ingredient definition. And we know that kombucha can be a great source of probiotics, of organic acids. Pets can definitely consume it safely. It's been around forever. Humans have been consuming it safely for a long time now, and we can't put it in the food. We can't. So the limitations go on, and it's such an unfortunate situation for the manufacturers who want to do things right. They want to get all their products registered correctly with the states and follow the rules, but on the flip side, they're being penalized and restricted on so many levels on what they can provide for these commercial products that it's a travesty, and it's unfortunately the arena that we have to work in. And I think the best way to the best ways to educate the consumer on what are our limitations, this is what we have to work with, and we're going to do our best to get it to you, in compliance. But at the same time, this is why we can only do certain things, and it really, really penalizes the small manufacturer that's doing whole foods, and initiates the chemical and byproduct manufacturer. It favors them. There's just no two ways about it. It favors big ag, big pharma, and big food, big chemical, and it penalizes small farms, regenerative, biodynamic agricultural facilities, and so forth. So that's what we're up against, folks, and we're trying to make a difference, but it's a heck of an uphill battle.
Yeah. And I didn't really intend to bring our herbal blends into this one, but there is some value there. And what makes me think of it is coming back to this book. So if there's not a definition in this book, then you're ultimately not allowed to use the ingredient. So definitions that are in this book, and we can share these with you. Sludge, again, liquid urea, anhydrous ammonia, recycled pet food, salvage pet food, fish oil from cannery waste, yet there's no definition for cannery waste. Nobody can clarify what that even means, what kind of cannery, like nobody seems to know at all.
Confectionery waste.
Yep. So those kinds of things that are not in this book that we can't legally use in a food or treat product: milk thistle, catnip, rose hips, like simple things, food things.
Spirulina.
Spirulina you can use, but only for coloring. So you can't actually use it for any kind of nutritional value, because God forbid it has that. So, if you have an herbal blend that's a really good quality that's separate, then you can use that, because that's a separate regulatory thing. So, we're fortunate to be able to offer that as well, and continue to build on that as we find awesome ways to do it. But yeah, we're doing our best. We feel like we have amazing things that are just the best of what nature can provide. It is very difficult actually to get a nutritionally balanced food, because it's not really easy to get the cleanest thing with whole prey model. Like, again, if you are feeding your pet dirt, then you probably are exposing them to things that may or may not be great. It kind of depends on your environment. So, you know, we're doing our best to get as close as we can to what nature would provide, and validating that we're doing a good job at doing that with nutritional analyses. And we do use these things as a base for information. But there's still also a lot of things where we're like, well, that's dumb.
Yeah.
Let's figure out a way to do this in a more ethical way than what the expectation is.
Yep,
So,
exactly.
all right. Well, thank you everybody for listening, and we'll catch you next time.
Thank you.